Is he more introverted dog?
Yeah, I think so, and kind of nervous. He has one girlfriend who he's known since he was a little puppy, the girl dog, and, he loves to play with her, but he doesn't really like any other dogs.
Oh, wow.
He likes people, he's great with people.
Okay, we'll put this as a teaser in the beginning of the interview, and the whole interview, people will be waiting for the moment when you talk about dogs, and the moment will not be coming. Hi, welcome to MATLAB Balance. This video is part of a series of interviews with people who popularize mathematics, and today our guest is Steven Strogatz, who works at Cornell University. He's a well-known math popularizer and the first applied mathematician on my channel.
Yes.
Hi, Steven. I'm very excited to have you as a
Hi, Mona,
guest.
great to be with you, and thanks for having this great channel. You do such a nice job, helping to spread the good word about mathematicians and mathematics, so I really admire what you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, that's so nice to hear.
And also, I love the angle that you take too, that we're people, it's
Yeah.
about the life of a mathematician, not just the work.
Yeah. Okay, let's learn something about you. So, I started learning things about you by checking out different sources, and I found out that you work on lots of completely different applications of mathematics and in a very broad sense, which is very impressive. So, I was wondering, how do you start working on a new area when you, yeah, don't know?
Yes, that's a good question because there are so many different ways. Sometimes it's a student will have a question that they're interested in, and, I really like it when my graduate students take initiative that way. So if they have some area like I had one student who wanted to do something about linguistics. I don't know anything about linguistics, but she was so excited. I think it sort of sets a good example that the teacher can be a student too, and that nobody knows everything, and we're all learning all the time. So sometimes it's the student who leads us meaning me and the student, into some new area. And sometimes it's more, maybe I'll just talk to some friend of mine. Cornell is in a small town, so we know each other. We see each other at the farmer's market. Our kids might go to daycare together. So you become friendly with people, and that's helpful for interdisciplinary work because you could then trust each other, like you in other words, you have to admit that you don't know certain things, and it's embarrassing for professors to do that, for anybody to do that. But, when you're friends, it's easier. And so I frequently like to work with my friends in computer science or biology or physics or some other area outside of math. So those would be my 2 recipes, either a new area through a student or through a friend.
Okay, now I'm curious, what was the linguistics project?
Well, there have been a few. This student, Danny Abrams was his name. He's now a professor at Northwestern. Um, he was he loves languages, and he grew up speaking English, but he also learned a lot of Spanish. He grew up in Texas, and so he went to a Spanish class at Cornell to keep improving his Spanish. But right before that class, there was another class in the language of the indigenous people of Peru and Ecuador called Quechua. And the Quechua professor saw him coming into the class and said, "Oh, you like languages? Maybe come to my Quechua class. You would like that." And Danny Abrams being Danny Abrams, he said, "Okay." So then he started learning Quechua, and it got him interested in this problem that language is on the verge of death because Spanish is a much higher status language in that part of the world, that parents want their kids to learn Spanish because of economic opportunities and other opportunities generally. So it's really difficult, and a lot of times kids can't even speak with their grandparents because they don't
Mhm.
know the language of their tradition. So Danny got interested in this question of how do languages change as a function of time in the number of
Mhm.
their speakers, and could that be tracked sort of like a population biologist would track a dying population.
Ah,
So
uh-huh.
he used methods of population biology, but he also was the kind of brave student who would put on his backpack and go to South America, and he just hiked around and slept in, hostels or sometimes in parks, and he came up with this strategy where he interviewed Catholic priests to ask them when was the last time they gave the Catholic mass in Quechua,
Oh.
as a way of measuring because there's no data about
Uh-huh.
this. You have to find an
Uh-huh.
inventive way of collecting statistics. And so
Mhm.
he used that as a kind of rough measure over a function as a function of time. How many years ago was it that the last service was in
Mhm.
Quechua? Anyway, so from this kind of thing, he collected data, also library work and whatever, but we ended up writing a paper that got published in Nature magazine about, modeling the the decline of languages with dynamical
Wow.
systems methods, sort of the
Uh-huh.
type that population biologists use. But so we were solving a differential equation, and then fitting parameters to the data that Danny had either collected or recorded in libraries. And it became a somewhat early paper in that field of the modeling of language death. It's now been, I don't know, cited many hundreds of times, I suppose.
Wow, wow, wow,
Yeah, it
wow,
became a
wow.
big thing, and it's just because there was this very smart, adventurous graduate student, and I let him do his thing because that's my
Uh-huh.
my philosophy as a teacher. If you have such a student, let them do what they want to do, and try to help them shape it into something that's gonna be high impact and well written and, of course, good math with interesting modeling assumptions. So, actually, in that paper, we took an extremely simplified approach where, we just thought about the language, number of speakers as a function of time, but, in competition with some other language, in this case, Spanish. And, we made certain symmetry assumptions. I mean, there were certain very simplifying things that we tried to do because there's no basic knowledge of what the laws are of language dynamics. We just we're making them up based on simple considerations of symmetry and smoothness and some other things.
Oh, actually, I wanted to ask you about this. So, I heard that you said in the Night Science podcast that biology is not always following the rules of beauty.
Uh-huh.
So, I think your example was that human eye is not perfectly beautiful in its structure, as I understood. However, math is like one of the main principles of doing math is like trying to find the beautiful answer
Uh-huh.
or picture. And I mean, you talked about this, but I'm still curious. Like, how does science find a balance between this?
That's a really tricky point because the ultimate test for science is supposed to be matching to experimental data or observations or other facts about the world. You could say beauty has nothing to do with it at all. It's just about data. And yet, uh, like in the example I just gave about language decline, we did use criteria that mathematicians would care about of simplicity, that we wanted to look
Mhm.
at the simplest model that contained the essential difficulty. Um, and so we did make certain assumptions that you could regard as a kind of imposition
Mm.
of a demand for beauty or simplicity or economy. In other words,
Mhm.
there was so much that we didn't know that we could make a model with many unknown parameters, but then there's sort of too much flexibility. It's hard to say anything interesting.
Mhm.
So you like to sort of constrain yourself, like beauty or simplicity or symmetry or other criteria of minimalism. That's my own personal taste. I like things that are
Mhm.
extremely minimal at the cost of being unrealistic.
Mhm.
Other applied mathematicians would go the other way. If they really care about the application a
Mhm.
lot, they would do whatever is necessary to get a good fit to data, and they might have a very ugly model with lots
Mhm.
of parameters, and they don't mind that because they can fit anything. But it's hard to make sharp statements and also to make statements that are testable or refutable, right? In the philosophy of science, we're trying to make scientific models that can be disproven so that progress can occur and you can move on to a better model. If your model is too flexible, has too many possibilities, you never really know if it's right or wrong because you could always change it a little. It's better if it's more rigid
Uh-huh.
in terms of making
I see.
progress. I don't know, that was the
I
way I
see.
was brought up.
So to choose less parameters,
Yeah,
in
if you have
essence?
fewer parameters, you have fewer choices, and you can be proven wrong. It's this funny thing. Most people think you're trying to prove yourself right. but in science, there is this concept that goes back to Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, that what makes science different from other parts of human thinking is not that it can be proven correct, but that it can be proven wrong, that it can be refutable. If you make a statement that sticks its neck out and there is some test which can prove it wrong, that's good because you've then really said something. I mean, that's brave. Right. If you have something that's so amorphous and vague that no one can ever prove you wrong because you could always make some adjustment, in Popper's thinking, that's not productive. I mean, at the time, he was a young man, or relatively young, and he was comparing Freudian psychology, um, Darwin's theory and evolution, and relativity in Einstein's work. And he felt that relativity was very different than the other 2 because relativity made certain strong predictions, and if the behavior of Mercury didn't, you know, the properties of Mercury's orbit didn't obey Einstein's math, then the theory was wrong. Whereas with Freudian psychology, no matter what was happening, the advocates could always find some explanation in Freudian terms, and so they thought that was a triumph that the theory was so powerful it could explain everything. But Popper thought it was a weakness because the theory could never be falsified. It made no real strong statements.
I watched this, series called
Maybe couples therapy?
yeah, couples therapy, so yeah, which was filmed in New York where the real psychoanalysis session, and
Yes,
I thought
yes.
I mean, I liked watching it because I think there were many interesting moments. However, I was impressed how, like, psychoanalysis can explain the opposite behaviors by the same reason. Like, if a person let's say a person had was abused in childhood, then if this person is overreacting in conflicts, then it's because they were abused in childhood. But if they're underreacting, it's because, they had to suppress their emotions.
Yes.
Because so like any not easy childhood can explain anything. And
Mhm.
no, despite that, I did like the series. I think
I agree, I also
many
like it very much.
many interesting things can one see in that series. However, this like way that everything can explain everything is
Well, I
was
think
very
yes,
confusing
exactly. I
for
think
me.
that's a nice example that, um, the explanatory power of these things it's really a difficult challenge in psychology because people are so complicated, and, I'm not sure that she's wrong. Childhood may explain things in contradictory directions, but it does make it hard to test the theory when it's that adaptable.
I think everything could be right, what she was saying, but I was amused that she does not notice that she uses opposite implications from the same
So interesting. Well, see, this is what
background.
happens when a mathematician watches television. She may notice contradictions.
Steven, I was actually curious. It's a bit of a random question, but I saw on your webpage that you studied the dynamics of the human sleep-wake cycle.
Yes, I
Can you
sure
tell a bit
did.
about it?
Oh,
What
of
did you
course, yes, I'd be
what
delighted
is it?
to. That was my PhD thesis was about sleep and wake, especially under very strange conditions where there was a lot of data, where in the 1960s, at the time when, we were starting to put people into outer space, both in the Soviet Union and United States, they had space missions, ultimately going to the moon and bringing the astronauts back, and a big question was what would happen to people when they didn't live in a 24-hour world anymore, a cycle of light and dark and sunrise and sunset. Like, what would it be like to be an astronaut in a space capsule? That was one question. And so experiments were done where people were deprived of the normal signals of sunlight and darkness. They just lived in a at first, the experiments were done in caves. They would put someone in a cave deep underground, and they might live there for 6 months by themselves. Really tough conditions, with animals like rats and bats and very cold temperatures. These were very brave volunteers who did these. Sometimes the scientists themselves were the volunteers, and they would go into these caves. Later, it became more civilized, and they would put people in special buildings or rooms that had no windows, no clocks, nobody would come in and tell them what time it was. So they could live for weeks or months without knowing what time it was, and then they would watch the experimenters would watch what happened to their biological rhythms, their
Wow.
hormone rhythms, their body temperature, their sleep cycle. What would we do if we weren't periodically driven by sunlight and darkness? And so I had access to a lot of data about that kind of thing. But okay, those are really artificial conditions. Um, but they do tell us a lot about how people sleep in the real world. So we could talk about different aspects of that if you want. I mean, should I tell you
I don't
some?
know. What's the most surprising thing you
Yeah, the
found
most
out?
surprising thing. Good. That's a good question. The most surprising thing is that there are certain times in your body's biological cycle, the so-called circadian cycle, where it's really hard to fall asleep. In other words, there's a kind of forbidden zone where even if you're tired, you probably can't fall asleep. So let me try to explain a little what I'm saying. The circadian cycle is not a familiar thing to most people. They wouldn't really know what I'm talking about. Okay, we have this sleep-wake cycle. We sleep every day, typically, usually around 7, 8 hours, 6 hours. Okay, that's one rhythm, the sleep and wake cycle. But inside your body, there are rhythms that you're not so aware of, but they're there. Your body temperature, for example, is not constant. It's not always the same temperature inside your body, deep in your body. If you measure a person's deep body temperature as a function of time in constant conditions where they're just lying there all day long, you see a really nice sine wave of temperature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's not a flat temp. Your body temperature goes up and down with a certain cycle, and it will do that for day after day. And you see this really clean body temperature rhythm, and it's because your body is filled with biological oscillators. Your brain, in the hypothalamus of the brain, has this natural clock that generates an approximately 24-hour rhythm, even if you didn't know anything. I mean, this is kind of fantastic to people who never heard this. We grew up on a planet with a 24-hour cycle, right? The Earth spins on its axis every 24 hours. That is built into our biology. Our cells know that we grew up on this planet. And so even if you live in a way that factors out the 24-hour rhythm of the world, your body still remembers it from billions of years ago. It's in every creature on Earth that I mean, everything from, the simplest
Oh,
single
all
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 living
creatures have
things
it?
have this. All live
Oh,
this
wow.
yeah, see, maybe you don't know this. This is a really wonderful subject. This is called circadian biology.
I thought it's a human thing, actually.
No, even bacteria, I think, might have it. They may not. Bacteria might be the only creatures that don't have very good circadian clocks, and I think even they might. I haven't been in the subject for 40 years. I mean, I did it as a graduate student, but back then we used to say bacteria didn't have circadian clocks, but everything else does. Single-celled organisms, like you don't need a whole body. One cell. One cell does this is a little my dog is busy licking my hand here. Maybe I could take a picture of him. Is he down here? You see him?
Yeah, show me. Hello, hello.
Yeah,
The introverted dog left away
yeah, Murray.
went away.
Murray is his name. He wants some attention. But so the statement that I wanted to make was that there's a certain phase in this underlying cycle where if you try to go to sleep, you'll find it almost impossible. It's about 8 hours before this time of, minimum body temperature. So, if you woke up every day at 7, your minimum body temperature would be at about 4 in the morning, and 8 hours before that would be about 6 o'clock. Wait, 8 o'clock at night. Yeah. So 8 o'clock at night, according to what I'm saying, should be a difficult time for a person to fall asleep if they normally wake up at 7 in the morning. And so where you might have experienced this is if you have to get up early for a flight to a country somewhere far away, and you have to get to the airport early, so you think, "I'm gonna go to bed early," but you can't fall asleep. You've had this
Uh-huh.
experience, right?
I never try. I know it's not gonna work,
It
so
doesn't work, and that's because you're trying
Mm.
to fall asleep in this time of maximum, resistance to falling asleep. So anyway, that was surprising to me, but it came out in the data. So that's
Well,
what my PhD was about, but in some ways, it was the most interesting work I ever did for the average person to hear about because everyone sleeps and we're all interested in our own bodies but it had the least math of anything I ever did. It was it was
ah,
it was kind of frustrating because I wanted to be a math professor, and here I was doing my PhD in some area that was scientifically very interesting, but was not giving me the tools I needed to become a good mathematician. And I was worried about it because I thought, "Who's gonna hire me? I don't wanna work in a department of sleep. I'm not a sleep not a sleep scientist." No, really, culture is important, right? You go through grad school, you get to meet people in some field. You go to
uh-huh,
conferences, they start to know your name. That's your
mhm.
natural trajectory. So I was all set up to become a sleep researcher, which I had no intention of doing. And I remember my mother was really surprised because she said, "What? I thought you like math. What are you doing studying sleep? Why are you doing that?" It was a good question. But there were really interesting math problems involved in modeling the sleep-wake cycle, but they weren't mathematically very deep. They were pretty elementary and very statistical, a lot of data. So I had to do something else for my postdoc, to
So
try to
actually,
get
I was
stronger.
wondering
Yeah.
because, I mean, you look so confident as a researcher, so I was curious which kind of struggles or I don't know, maybe insecurities you
Mhm.
had. And not I heard about the story of your first year of undergrad. This I remember when no one motivated mathematics for you. This I remember, but maybe later on in your research career.
Many
Uh,
times. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any more great confidence than anybody else, I don't think. I mean, I certainly had some struggles. That was one, this question of here I am, I go through graduate school, I take a lot of courses in biology and biophysics because I think at that time in my life, I think my space is gonna be applying math to biology. It wasn't a very popular thing to do at the time. There Everyone knew that math had applications, but mostly it was applied in engineering or computer science or physics or something. But math in the softer subjects like biology or even social science, or linguistics, any of those areas, that felt like not overpopulated. Like there would be more room for someone to do something new. And so I was interested in them. I like all different subjects. I mean, I really like so many different things to learn about. So I really thought, "Okay, I gotta be a math biologist, and I need to learn some biology," but I ended up not really doing that much math in graduate school, and
so
I've
how did you do
well,
like
yeah, it's been a
actually?
problem for me my whole life,
Oh,
including yes,
really?
I would say so. I always feel very insecure about, how little math I know. Now, probably everybody has their own insecurities. But when I hear my colleagues in the math department I'm in now, and they start talking about group representation theory, I feel like, well, I don't really know what that is. I mean, I know what group theory is. I was never very good at it. I don't really understand what representation theory is. I understand that you could think of groups as if they were matrix groups and that somehow that's helpful, but I don't really get it because I never studied graduate level math, except in applied math, I did. So if it's about differential equations, I'm secure. But outside of that, anything in number theory or topology or serious analysis, rigorous analysis, I have like an undergraduate level understanding. And I wasn't even that good as an undergraduate. In pure math, there were a lot of better students. So I've always been insecure about that, but I figure everybody has their own problems. So, you
Would
know,
you like to learn that kind of
Yes, I
math
love
or
that
not?
stuff. I love it when I get
No.
to teach it. It's so fun.
Let's say someone your colleague is talking about some abstract math that you don't understand. What do you wish they did better?
Great. Yeah, that comes up all the time because I don't tend to go to our department colloquia for that reason, that I go for a few minutes and then I get lost so quickly that, I just leave. It irritates me to be in a talk that I can't understand. Now, partly it's for the reason I said, that I don't have a proper background through the accidents of my own history. that I didn't learn what is common knowledge to my colleagues, I think, because I didn't come up in the same culture. So that's my problem. But even within that, I still feel like I should be able to understand more than I do. And I blame some of that on the speaker.
So
Um,
what do you think wish they did better?
yeah. Well, what tends to help is if you can give the audience a question that is a motivating question for the subject. The way I often phrase it is, if you can help the reader, if you're writing, if you help the reader or the listener love the question. The
Mhm.
first goal is that they should understand the question. Then that's already hard. But the second is if they could love the question and see, wow, that is a really cool question. I wonder how that, what have people discovered about that, or how how would they approach that question? But you have to first now, by the way, this emphasis on the question is, already not standard. Most speakers, as you know, will state the question pretty quickly and then spend the rest of the time talking about the solution or the answer. And that is, I think, a big mistake because the listener doesn't care. Why do I care? I mean, that stuff is hard. The answer is gonna be hard. So I don't
Mhm.
care about that, and I'm lost and I feel annoyed. And I also don't understand what we're doing. Like, why are we talking about this? Because I haven't been properly set up to understand and appreciate and ideally love the question. So I would much rather a talk spend half the talk on the question. And so that means many things. It could be the history of the question. Who worked on it? Where did it first come up? Why is it important? How does it connect to other parts of math? How does it connect to other parts of science? How does it connect to society? I mean, okay, if it's really pure, like if it's algebraic K theory, it may not connect to society, but it certainly connects to other parts of math. So, like, if you told me people doing category theory saw this thing, or people doing algebraic geometry saw that thing, and like there was this certain shared phenomenon and people realized there was something more general happening. And so they invented K theory. I don't know. I'm making this up because I don't know what K theory is. But if it was some kind of story like that, I would be interested.
Do you think for any question one can come up with an, like, entertaining story?
Yeah, because there was a reason that people got fascinated by that question. There was, right? I mean, you could tell me.
I have to tell you bad news that sometimes people talk about a question just because they found an answer, not because
Of course.
everyone wanted to know the answer. So
Okay. Now that's a really good point because we have to remember that these talks that we all listen to are embedded in a culture where people are trying to get jobs or trying to improve their position, trying to get their reputation enhanced, impress the experts, move to a different institution that they would prefer. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people are giving talks besides pure scholarly reasons. And that's fine. That's the reality. We live in that world. So I'm not criticizing anyone for doing that. But it can be a conflict. That is, the thing that you do to try to impress the listener might be different than the thing you do to help the listener understand. I mean, think how often we talk about results being trivial, right? That's our big put down that such and such a result is trivial. And, that's always a bad thing when someone says that because to a person who doesn't understand, it's not trivial. And then being told it's trivial is just further insult. So I really wish we would stop doing that because so much of math is wonderful all the way down to the most childish thing. There's nothing trivial. I mean, yes, you could bore people by the reason that the concept of triviality exists is you don't wanna bore the listener and you don't wanna insult them. Like, if they already understand something, don't waste time on that. So it is a matter of empathy. Like, do you understand who you're talking to? And are you, connecting with them at the level that they're at? If you're too low or too high, there's a problem. So that's what people are trying to do when they say something is trivial. It's like a shared understanding that we're not gonna waste time on that. I know you're at a different level, so I'm gonna try to meet you where you are. So I guess it comes from a good heart, a good impulse. But sometimes it comes from a bad impulse to just show off, like, "This stuff is trivial because I'm so smart." If it comes from vanity, that's not helpful.
And I think, as you said, it would be nice if it would be symmetric, like trying to go not too high and not too low. However,
Yeah,
I think people are more afraid to say something trivial than they're afraid to
right.
explain something, which there's a big asymmetry,
That's the
which
bit that
I
big
find depressing.
asymmetry is a big part of the communication problem. I'm glad we're talking about this because I do feel communication from one mathematician to another is a subject that we don't think about enough. What like, people associate me these days with math communication. I've been very devoted to that now for some well, really my whole career, but especially the past 20 years or so. And it's usually understood to mean communication from mathematicians to the public, which is, yes, a big part of it. But there's other parts. There's communication of mathematicians to other scientists in adjacent fields to math, and there's communication within math of mathematicians to each other. And we really spend very little time on that. Um, and I think it's a very sick part of our culture, actually.
But how would you suggest to do things better, or how do you try to do things
I
better?
really wish we could think about it as a group and take it seriously because I think we're wasting a lot of people's time. Um, I think, for example, most colloquia are not genuine colloquia, as opposed to a seminar, right? A seminar is for experts, people really in some specialized area. That's one thing. But a colloquium is supposed to be for the whole department. And so when someone talks about graph theory and someone else is listening who's, in numerical analysis or some field that's not graph theory, there's a gulf. They have to try to bridge that gulf. And a really good colloquium is for everyone to show the beauty and the collective unity of math. And the math is integrated. It's one great web of ideas. So that's what we're there to celebrate, and we almost never do. We usually just talk to the one other expert in the department that invited us to give the colloquium, and then the really sick part is everybody just sits there like, "Okay, this is another talk I don't understand, but I'm gonna try to get something out of it by just listening." Like, I'll hear some words and math is difficult, and I'll learn something. Okay. I just think we could do a lot better than that because I've heard speakers that, really make an effort to explain what the subject is about, why it's interesting, how it connects to other things. And then, they try to go into some depth about what the question was and even what the solution was that they want to discuss. That's fine. But it takes effort to do that kind of talk. You have to think a lot about the audience and you have to do what you're discussing about the asymmetry. You have to be willing to go into this zone that people are worried is too trivial. It's not too trivial. It's actually kind, it's friendly. And the thing is, mathematicians are perfectly good at this if they're talking to each other one-on-one. Like, if suppose you and I were just sitting together and I said, "I don't know anything about K theory." You could explain it to me, I'm sure, just the 2 of us. You would figure out what I know, what I don't know, and
Mhm,
you would make adjustments, and you would give me a lot that I don't currently have, and I would be
mhm.
grateful. The thing that we have trouble with is when it's one to many, when it's one person talking to a group or one person writing a paper. I mean, that's the other thing. Our culture of writing is so messed up. If you look at the way the papers begin, almost always with no real introduction, just getting right into it, that's a mistake. And that's not historically the way it was. If you look at any work by Euler, or any of the great masters of the past, and not even ancient people. Like, if you look at, old papers by, there's a probability theorist named Mark Kotz, K-A-C. Mark Kotz, his papers are really beautiful and very friendly. He gives you a whole introduction that explains the setup and why it's interesting, and then he gives you real theorems and proofs later. But he makes it interesting for everybody at first, and, there's just some kind of nasty culture that I don't know who to blame it on, whether it's Bourbaki or Gauss or somebody who decided it has to be very brief, that being concise is the aesthetic we're going for. We wanna be really brief. I mean, interesting good counterexample is Terry Tao. If you look at Terry Tao's blog, he's
Mhm.
super friendly, and he seems to think a lot about the audience. He writes for everybody. He also writes for specialists. You know, he'll show you his latest work. So if you wanna see what he's thinking about, he explains that, but he also writes very generally, like, to students. I mean, he seems to be exercising himself all across the spectrum of communication from the most elementary to the most advanced, and it's incredibly generous for one of the world's great mathematicians to do that. So I wish we would follow his example and try to do, more of that, adjust our level to the audience.
But how do you think one could change realistically this writing culture?
Well, we don't have a good feedback loop right now. We allow people to do this current system. Nobody's complaining.
Mhm.
You know, I feel sort of embarrassed to be complaining about it, especially because of my earlier insecurity that I mentioned, that you could say, like, okay, when I sit there feeling unhappy in the colloquium, I wonder, am I the only one that's unhappy? Maybe it's my poor background that's causing the problem and everybody else understands. But I don't think that's true, and when I've talked to some colleagues who are honest and willing to be vulnerable, they say that they don't understand either, but they don't expect to understand. So I do think it's a yes, I have my own problems, but I do think it's broader than my problems. But because we don't complain, it just keeps going. Okay, that's one argument, that we're not doing enough punishment. We're not doing enough complaining. But the other argument could be we're not doing enough rewarding, right? They talk about the carrot and the stick.
Yeah.
So we're not using the stick, but we're also not using the carrot. What if we really somehow praised or complimented people who genuinely gave good colloquia or good talks that were broad? Like
Mm.
we always say, make the talk accessible to the graduate students. Very few people do. But if we somehow could reward them and point out how great it was what they did. As another example, that it's not just a matter of how difficult our subject is, go to any physics colloquium. Okay, so the physicists have a different culture than the mathematicians. If you read a physics paper, it has a good introduction, a real introduction. And if you also go to their colloquia, a particle theorist is talking in a way that an astrophysicist can understand, or a condensed matter experimentalist or whatever. They talk to each other. They don't make the mistake that we make. So I don't think we need it. I think it's some sick thing that we need to get rid of.
I wanted to ask you, I noticed before that you have strong opinions, and I wonder if you ever had to, like if you had ever to pay a price for it, and or if you would recommend your colleagues to also share their controversial opinions, or this is not such a good idea for them.
I suppose I do have strong opinions, yes. Um, what the question was, has that gotten me into trouble? Was that it?
Ever
Or
yeah.
yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, and if you would recommend others to be more
I
vocal.
don't know what I would recommend. I think I would recommend people should try to be true to themselves. If they're a very reasonable, modest, measured person,
Hmm.
that's a good way to be. Like my colleague John Guggenheimer, now retired, I never really heard him say any critical, mean thing about anything ever. He's so mild and pleasant and reasonable and accurate. He doesn't exaggerate. He's just very objective, and I can't imagine him getting angry or me ever getting angry at him. Whereas a different colleague, John Hubbard, is so extreme and exaggerates so much and is so theatrical. I personally find Hubbard much easier to learn from because he's so clear. He's so ridiculous. Like, you can't miss what he's saying. He's so extreme. And he could be really mean and nasty but he's mean and nasty to everybody, including himself. He's kind of funny. Like, he's almost a performance artist. He's so absurd. But he's also a great mathematician and sees connections and knows many I mean, both of them are great mathematicians. The 2 Johns, they're about the same age, and they really knew each other, and they worked in similar areas in dynamical systems, both very accomplished. But they were really at opposite ends of, this sort of stylistic spectrum. So, I don't know. I always like I say, I found Hubbard easier to learn from because he really stuck his neck out and made strong statements, and I found him very clear, whereas with Guggenheimer, I had to listen very carefully to try to understand what is he really saying because it was so accurate. Like, you could easily see what's wrong with what Hubbard is saying, and that was stimulating. I don't know, so that's a matter of taste. Hubbard was not afraid to be wrong. He was wrong a lot in public, whereas I don't think I ever saw Guggenheimer ever say anything wrong about anything. Um, so I don't know. My point was that they have different personalities, and I think both of them were true to themselves. So people, I think, should just be themselves, and if you're, eh, gonna be, a Hubbard, be a Hubbard, and if you're a Guggenheimer, be a Guggenheimer. I don't know, that's my own feeling. But I guess my lesson, if anyone's looking for lessons or advice, is, if something is not working, you should probably stop doing it. Like in sports, they have this philosophy that if your strategy is not working, change your strategy. If the game is not going well, do something different. And other people will tell you, no, you're being a quitter if you do that. You got to keep working until you get it to work. Don't give up. But I don't believe in that. I actually believe in giving up strategically because everything that you're doing means you're not doing something else. And there are a lot of good things to do. And if something is after trying reasonably hard, if it's not working well, try something else. I just that's been always my attitude.
I'd like to ask you about this because this sounds very reasonable and I love that. But we also know all these stories of mathematicians who, thought for 10 years about a problem and then they
Right.
proved it and then they got blah, blah, blah. So
Right, right.
this, it's not
Exactly.
just as a narrative, but it's also, these are true
They're
stories of
true
some people,
stories.
right?
One has to think about oneself. Some people who are really stubborn and tenacious are well suited to thinking about something for a long time and not giving up. And sometimes they produce marvelous breakthroughs, and that is great. And it's true that nothing important happens without hard work. So you don't want to give up too easily. I'm not
So
advocating
so how does
this
one
is not easy to
decide when to
I
give up?
don't know. I don't know how to answer this question. This is a judgment. This is what makes somebody an effective researcher or not. You have to have judgment. If you give up too early, you'll never do anything interesting. If you give up too late, you will have spent your whole time on an impossible problem, and again, you haven't done anything good.
But okay, you have kids. So if your kid would ask like whether it's time or not to give up on something not working, how would you what would you tell them?
Well, I guess I would think about a few considerations. How do you feel during the struggle? If you're making a little progress, you haven't accomplished what you want, but there's signs of hope. You're still making some progress or you're learning better what doesn't work, like that's progress too. You're eliminating certain possible avenues. That's progress. If there's some indication of some kind of progress, then it's not time to give up yet. Or there's also the question of the emotional side. How do you feel about all this? Are you really, really suffering? Or do you feel like a pleasant sense of frustration? So I could give you an example. I had a problem in my own childhood as a high school student. We haven't talked about the question, how did I get into math? So in high school, I had a question. that a teacher gave the whole class,
Mhm.
a geometry problem. I've talked about to many other
Yeah, that's
interviewers,
why
so you may have
yeah.
heard it. So I won't go into the
Yes.
details of it. But the point was it was a
Okay.
geometry question and I couldn't solve it. And the teacher said he didn't know how to do it. And that was very motivating to me because I respected this teacher a lot. And so I thought about the problem and I felt like I should be able to do this problem. And I thought about it for about 6 months, and I thought about it all the time, all day long, in the shower, walking around, playing basketball, in French class. I was always thinking about this stupid problem. And I kept making progress because I would try doing it with trigonometry, and I almost got it, but then I couldn't solve some equation that came out after I applied the law of sines to this triangle problem. So I made progress up to a point, and then I got stuck. Then I tried other constructive proofs, like, they almost worked, but they didn't. Like, I kept trying things, and I kept doing stuff for months and months, and eventually I got something that worked, and so it really felt fantastic, right? It's one of those things that makes us love math, that you try for a long time, and then you get it, and it's very exciting. Um, so that shows I didn't give up quickly. I was stubborn. But then after that, I started making up problems for myself because I wanted to have that feeling again. And I made up questions that were in the category of, I call them chase problems. It was always about a particle moving in a certain way and some other particle chasing it by always aiming directly at it. And then, as the one thing is moving away, the other thing is changing its direction. And so, like, you could picture a dog chasing a rabbit or something like that. And so there were rules for the motion of the target and then motion of the thing that's pursuing. And so it was this tricky system of differential equations, and they were not the ones I had been taught in my textbook. And so I made up one really simple question, which was the rabbit is just going around at uniform velocity around a circle. And the dog starts at the center of the circle and aims directly towards wherever the rabbit is. And then as the rabbit moves, the dog keeps changing its direction and it keeps getting closer and closer. And I could see in my mind that the dog is going to spiral out and asymptotically approach the circle. And then you could make an assumption about those two speeds. What's the ratio of the two speeds? And, if the dog is slower than the rabbit, it's never going to catch the rabbit. If it's faster than the rabbit, it seems like it will, of course, catch the rabbit. And if it's at the same speed, it seems like it will asymptotically approach the rabbit. And that was the question I was interested in. Could I calculate the equation of this spiral that asymptotes to a circle? Seems like it's a standard parametric equation type of problem. And I had learned about spirals in pre-calculus, but I had never seen a spiral that asymptoted to a circle. And I felt like I could write down equations that would have that property, but were they the solution to this differential equation? And none of them worked. And I thought about that one for a very long time, and I could never get it. And eventually I gave up. And it turns out you can't do it. I mean, I didn't know that. I was very
Mhm.
naive. I didn't realize at the time that nonlinear differential equations often don't have closed form solutions in terms of the elementary
Mm.
functions that you learn about in high school.
Mhm.
It didn't
Mhm.
that didn't occur to me, but I
Mhm.
inadvertently picked a problem that has no simple closed form solution. So, of
Mhm.
course, I got stuck, but,
Mhm.
um, but I got very far on it, and it was still interesting, and I didn't hate being stuck. It felt good. I mean, it didn't feel good to be stuck, but I didn't mind the the well, I was doing research. I didn't realize it, but
Mhm.
this was the feeling of doing research. So, why did I know when to stop? I don't know. At some point, I just couldn't think of anything else to do. So I don't have a general algorithm for when to give up, but if you're really not making progress and you're not enjoying it anymore, I think that's a good time to give up. But, it's a really serious problem because as a graduate student advisor, you're giving students problems all the time and they're getting stuck all the time. And you feel some responsibility that they do have to graduate in a reasonable amount of time. So, what advice do you give them when it's time to switch the problem, especially if they've invested years in their problem? You don't wanna say give up. So, that's
You
it's
give
hard.
students problems you don't know. you don't have a vague idea how to solve?
Those are the only ones I give, really. I don't have much patience for exercises where I know that they can do it. Some advisors do that, right? I have good colleagues
Mm.
who give their students problems that they know they could solve, but they give it as, like it's sort of like a bird, where the mama bird eats the food and then gives it to the baby bird to eat it. That's what I feel like these advisors are pre-chewing the food, and then they give it to the baby to be like, "Okay, now you do it." And that may be a good strategy for teaching people how to solve technically, how to solve problems, like to develop technique. But I really feel like the heart of graduate school education is more than that. It's how to pick a problem that may be tractable even though you don't know how to do it, and that's at the right level for you, that would be interesting for your community. These are the real skills that make a great researcher. And I worry that my colleague's approach, that his students never learned the most important thing. They're just really staying at undergraduate level, and they don't learn what it really means to be imaginative. So I don't let my students do that usually. I try to do the real thing with them, which is scary because sometimes they do get stuck and then we have to switch the problem. So I don't claim that my method is great. It's high risk. And often discuss that with the student ahead of time. I mean, some advisors suggest a graded approach where the first problem, I mean, in fact, this colleague of mine who I really love and respect, he does the first problem with the student. Actually, they do it together, which in
Mhm,
practice means that the advisor does it. But the
mhm,
student sort of watches the problem getting solved and participates. The second problem is a tractable problem that the advisor suggests, but they keep their hands off it, and the student does that one. And then the third problem, the student invents the problem and tries to do it him or herself. So that's like swimming lessons, right? First, I'm gonna let you swim, and I'm gonna hold your belly, and you're not gonna drown or take in too much water. Then I'm gonna let go now that you can swim. No, really, it's a very nice way to teach, very gentle.
Steven, in my field, first year, we just spent reading.
There's also that, all this learning, right? You need to learn so much. Yeah. I see. So did you not have much experience of the type I'm describing with these, different advising styles?
Oh, I think I was very lucky that I was um, the how did you say bird mouth, this
Yeah.
kind of thing?
Yeah.
So I think I felt very grateful that I was given a problem, not by my advisor. Before I came to the PhD, I was given a problem which had an expected answer, and it's not like it was obvious how to get there, but it was to an expert, it was clear that it's doable. The
Uh-huh.
answer was expected, and the path there was okay, not maybe not obvious path, but I think an expert could have figured it out. It's not how is it called? Not rocket science.
Yeah.
So, but then when I was doing my PhD, my PhD advisor did not give concrete problems to students. So he had this non-bird approach where he was always happy to talk about a math area, but he did not want to give a specific problem. He wanted a student to find their problem
Uh-huh.
themselves, which would be more of a research, as you're saying.
Uh-huh.
So it sounds like my PhD buddies would have a more scientifically better time. However, I think I felt more secure, and this allowed me to actually spend most of my PhD time working on collaborative projects with other friends of mine, which had nothing to do with my PhD project
Okay.
because my PhD project was rather expectable-ish, solvable.
Uh-huh.
So so I was happy to be given this food so that I could, hang out with other birdies and and
Really?
play
Wait,
our
what?
own games.
You're saying your PhD project was this thing that was expected to be solvable, but had some
Yeah.
technical difficulty getting there.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, maybe I'm too shy, but I don't even want to say that there were any technical difficulties.
Not even
Let's
that.
say it
Okay.
okay, look, I'm not the
You're so
most
modest.
objective judge. I'm not the most objective judge, but let's say definitely knowing what the answer should be
Yeah.
helps. So,
It does, yeah.
um
And do you think that was an appropriate PhD problem?
yeah, I'm very happy with the way it worked out,
Okay,
so
because it was
because I could I mean,
yeah,
the best part was, collaboration projects with my friends.
right. So did
So
those collaborations lead to other papers?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Ah,
yeah, yeah. This was the fun.
okay.
Yes. My friends are amazing mathematicians, and, uh, they/we wrote a bunch of cool
But
papers.
this
I
is
mean, I
great.
was the younger one, and I was so happy to learn from them.
So you really had a
Yes.
very good experience, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing.
Uh-huh. You think your advisor expected it would work like this? That you would have this thing that was your own problem, but then you would collaborate with other people your
I
own
think my
age?
advisor so my PhD advisor is, uh I did an interview with him. I think he's the kindest person out of all of us, out of all math people, and,
Nice.
he has n I think he has no expectations, but also doesn't impose any expectations.
Uh-huh.
So he's always happy. You can come to his office always, and he's always happy to talk about any math question whatsoever. He's, like, just open to think about any math question you ask him.
Uh-huh.
Always,
Yeah.
any. And so with that amazing service, but he doesn't tell you what to do,
Uh-huh.
and he doesn't want to put discipline on.
Yeah.
I remember it was a very funny story. One of my PhD siblings came to my advisor and said that his, job contract is ending, meaning that he has to get it, prolonged
Uh-huh.
because he comes to his advisor and says, that his job contract is ending, and Mark looks back and says, "Oh, but why?" Yeah, I'm really sorry for everyone who can't be my advisor's student.
Are you good? Can you tell who it is? Mark who?
Yeah, Mark Levin. I don't know if you know him.
Mark Levine?
Yeah, he was at Northeastern, and
Uh-huh.
then he moved to Germany. He's in
He
Essen.
sounds great.
Yeah,
Sounds like such a good guy.
yeah.
Okay, I need to look him
He sure
up.
is.
Yeah.
He's from Detroit, and he loves recommending Detroit to everyone.
I see. Well, you speak
Says
very
it's
affectionately of him. He sounds wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, in Essen, there were not so many other. Essen is a city in Germany which was destroyed completely during the war and
Mhm.
rebuilt very quickly into like gray boxes of houses.
Mm.
So there was not much joy except for talking to my advisor, which was totally worth being in Essen. So saw that there is a prize named Steven Strogatz Prize. Yes, it's exciting. So it's a prize for high school students for so you can submit you being a high school student, you can submit any piece of math popularization or like communicating math. And then someone, I don't know if it's you or not, evaluates them and
I have
finds
been
the
on the
best.
judging
Oh.
staff, or committee. I hope in the future we'll have other people too. I mean, we have right now
How
4 or
do you
5
choose?
people.
How do you choose? Okay, first of all, amazing idea, but how do you choose what is better among all these
We
pieces?
don't I mean, we have 3 criteria that we advertise, content,
What are they?
creativity, and communication. So what is the piece of work about? I say it vaguely like that, piece of work, because it could be writing, it could be
Mm,
a poem, it could be a
mhm.
performance. You know, some students have submitted dance videos of themselves dancing,
Ooh, wow.
showing different either transformations or symmetries or whatever. Um, it could be, like, so there's a lot of different media that can be used. Could be a
Mhm,
sculpture, it could be a poem, whatever. Um, so we care about what is the mathematical content being expressed, how creative is the execution of whatever the idea is, and how effective is it at communicating some mathematical insight. So we weigh all 3 of those things. We don't have any, simple way of measuring, but those are the things we're looking for, all 3. And, there are several judges, and I really appreciate them helping. This prize was created when I turned 60. My wife, wanted to do something for my 60th birthday, which was so nice of her, and she got got people to create this prize
it's
where we can
amazing.
encourage high school students, open to the whole world. It's not just US,
Are the
it's a
are there many
worldwide.
applications?
Yeah, this year we had about 100 applicants,
Mm.
and, we try to give lots of prizes. Yeah,
Is it
it's
easy for you in the committee to agree, like, on this
it is pretty
criteria?
easy. Yeah, it is pretty easy, but
Oh,
there are
really?
often some
Mm,
standouts that, are amazingly impressive. It's great what students will think of, and it also gives a chance for someone to be mathematically expressive in a different way, right? We know about math circles, math Olympiad, There's traditional ways of being a young mathematician and expressing your love of math and interest in math. But this is another way, which is to share your love of math with other people. And it attracts possibly different kinds of students. Sometimes students work in groups. There could be teams that submit an entry. Sometimes it attracts people who are more interdisciplinary or artistic. They see math and how it connects to poetry or to dance or to science or business or whatever. Um, and so a student who is broader than a usual math Olympiad person. I'm not saying a math Olympiad person isn't broad, but it's a different dimension of math that doesn't normally get as much
So what are the
exposure.
prizes that you give?
Oh, well, we give money.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
in multiples of pi. They get,
Oh!
100 pi dollars or 200 pi dollars, or 600, roughly $600. So it's not, um, for a kid, it's a significant amount of money, but also
No, 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 and it's
it's a
funny
it's a
anyway.
na it's an international award. They can use it on their CV, and they're very proud.
I I I
Yeah.
just thought I do have a teenager, kid of a friend who is into math, so I should tell him to apply.
They should apply, and then also we have, Zoom sessions where I meet the students and also write little things about their project, and
Oh, nice.
we sometimes display their work at the National Museum of Math, MoMath, in New York City. So, yeah, people you can go on the MoMath website and see some of the previous winners' projects. It's impressive what they do. It's always fun to see what the students come up with.
The question that's really important to me because I'm now trying, unrelated completely to everything we discussed. I'm trying myself to write a non-mathematical book as
Ah,
a side project of my life.
yeah.
But I was wondering, how do you find confidence to write a book? As in, when you're writing, how can you be sure that you wrote it in a good way? Because for you, okay, I think my task is easier. For you, you have to be interesting, accessible, funny, and like all these things together. So, how do you, like, you write some words, and then how do you know that it's, the right way to put them?
The closest I can come to thinking of a good answer to that is I think in terms of my own reactions to things that I found moving or thrilling. You know, I so I, um, read a lot. If I'm reading different science writers or math writers who have made an impression on me, I try to watch what they're doing. Uh, I did write an article that was in the notices of the American Math Society that was called, "Writing Writing About Math for the Traumatized and the Perplexed." I especially like this audience. There are people who already like math, and a lot of us write
Mhm,
that do math popularization write for people who like math naturally, like Martin Gardner, did that,
mhm,
Ian Stewart
mhm.
does that, and a lot of people. But I'm especially interested in the people who are scared of math or don't like it, or um, I would like to attract them to see that it's more interesting than they think, or that they,
So people who actively dislike math, you try to attract them?
I am interested in them. Yeah, I mean, yes, some of them, I don't wanna make it too extreme. Some people actively dislike it. I would love to reach them. There are other people who don't dislike it, they're just indifferent. They don't hate it, they don't love it, they don't care. They never saw the
Mm.
point of it. A lot of
Oh,
smart
I
a
see.
lot of smart people feel that way. So that is also a population I'm very interested in, that they don't see any point, and they don't know why someone would like it. They may have heard people say, "Oh, it's elegant, it's beautiful," but they don't get it. What's beautiful about it? Okay, I wanna try to show them.
Mm.
And so how to do it, I think of articles or books that I have read in my, 65 years on Earth, that there were people who said something a certain way that made me excited, and then I think, "Well, what did they do?" And I wrote about them in this article that I just mentioned. And so I gave 3 examples of people who used different strategies that worked for me and that I try to copy or or borrow from what they did. So, like Stephen Jay Gould, I mean, he writes about evolution, he writes about biology. but he always begins with some little story about something in everyday life or pop culture. And it's not intimidating, it's very easy. Another guy who I like very much has named Lewis Thomas, also wrote about biology. His stuff is very poetic. Reading his words, I always feel like I wanna listen to the rhythms and the word choices. He's also very funny. Actually, as I look at this article, I see that I can give you a better answer to your question. You asked how to do outreach. So I said, I had 3 strategies that I think work a lot, which I summarized as illuminate, strategy 1. Try to illuminate, try to give the reader a shiver of pleasure, some kind of aha experience. I now understand something. So I've been illuminated, the light bulb has gone on. And that means actually showing some math. A lot of people think that you shouldn't write about math if it's math popularization, but yes, you should. You should try to give them some genuine mathematical experience, which could be at a very elementary level, but it should be genuine. Another thing besides illumination is connection. If you can make connections either between different parts of math that the reader might already like, or between something else that the reader enjoys. So that's this trick that Stephen Jay Gould would do, that he would be writing about movies or TV shows or something you saw at a museum or a flower or something easy, and then connect it to something deep. It's about connections with him. That was his trick. Tie the math to something the reader already enjoys. And then the other thing, uh, method 3 is to be a friend. Treat the reader like a friend of yours. If you really visualize that this is not just a reader, this is your friend, like picture a real person that you like, you will take on a very sweet voice. You'll be nice. You'll
Oh,
automatically
I
because it's
love
your
this.
friend, you'll automatically
I
be
love this.
gentle. Well, it's really good. I think of how rarely earlier I was complaining about our math articles. People don't write like they're writing to their friend. They write actually like they're writing to their enemy who's gonna criticize them and find a mistake in their proof, right? They're writing immediately from a posture of defensiveness like this.
Mhm.
That's not the voice you want. If you treat the reader like your friend who wants to learn and wants to understand, but they don't know things, if you're really friendly, you'll instinctively do everything right. But
Wow, that's such a
we
great
don't
answer.
think like that. So those are 3 strategies: illuminate, connect, and be friendly.
Speaking of poetic, so I very much can enjoy poetic writing, but you said like you see how other people have written it and you try to, maybe
Yeah,
not do the same way, but when I
try.
read something poetic, I don't know how to write in a poetic way. So
But you can
I'm not sure it's
practice. You could
transferable.
practice. Poetry
Like,
may be too intimidating for you or for
did
most
you
people.
practice to write in a
I
fiction
listen
way?
to them, like I say, I read them out
Mm.
loud, and then,
Mm.
you can hear certain rhythms, certain
Oh, wow.
musicality in their,
I see your PhD coming shining through.
oh, because of the
Circadian
rhythms.
rhythms.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't have any training in music, but I'm interested in music. I have a very musical daughter, my younger daughter,
Mm,
and
mm.
I think I might have some natural inclination toward music that's not developed. Um, so maybe it comes out a little bit in the writing. It actually, in my style of writing, or my technique, I often dictate into my phone. On the phone,
Oh,
there's a little
really?
microphone. You could
Yeah?
just talk into your phone and it will make a
Yeah.
speech to text. I do
Ah,
that
interesting.
frequently. For writing the introduction, I will often just dictate what I want to say, and it comes out very conversational because that's the way people talk. And then, of course,
Wow.
it needs editing, most of it is terrible,
Mhm.
but some of it is really pretty good. And so for people who wonder how can their voice become friendlier in their writing, try dictating instead of typing. If you just talk into the phone and imagine a real person that you're talking to, a friend, and the friend could be at different levels. It could be another mathematician, it could be your sister, could be anybody, depending what you're trying to do, you know? And, so depending on your audience, just talk to that audience and picture a real person, not an abstract, generalized reader. And if you talk to that real person, you'll probably come up with something pretty warm and it will give you good material that you can edit into a nice part of your work, you know? I mean, it's trivial, right? Trivial in a good way.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I shall try.